Captain James Thorne received the evacuation order at dawn, but by sunset he would break every military oath he'd ever sworn for a seamstress who hummed while the world burned. The telegram crackled in his weathered hands like autumn leaves, each word a death sentence for the town of Millbrook. Enemy advance confirmed. Evacuate all civilians. Fallback position Echo 7. No exceptions. Colonel Brennan's signature bled across the bottom in urgent ink. James folded the paper with the precision of a man who'd folded too many like it. Through the window of the makeshift command post, Millbrook stretched before him, a patchwork of cobblestone streets and timber-framed houses that had weathered 3 generations of storms. Smoke curled from morning chimneys, carrying the scent of bread and bacon. Children's laughter drifted from the schoolyard where Miss Cordelia taught arithmetic to faces that still believed in tomorrow. You can almost taste the normalcy, thick as honey on the tongue. But James knew better. The enemy was 18 miles out and closing fast. "Sir." Lieutenant Morrison stood at attention, his boyish face pale beneath his cap. "The evacuation wagons are ready. We can have everyone out by nightfall." "Good." James reached for his coat, then stopped. His fingers found the small velvet box in his breast pocket, the one he'd carried for 3 months, waiting for the right moment that would never come. "Morrison, I need you to handle the North Quarter. Start with the families that have children." "What about the South Quarters, sir?" "That's where I'll handle the South Quarter myself." Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. They both knew what lay in the South Quarter. Or rather, who? The cobblestones rang beneath James's boots as he walked through streets that time had forgotten. Millbrook existed in a bubble of peace that the war hadn't yet popped. Women hung laundry while humming old ballads. Men tipped their hats in greeting. A tabby cat sunned itself on a windowsill, tail twitching at invisible prey, the seamstress. Shop sat tucked between the baker and the clockmaker, its painted sign reading "Rosalind's Fine Tailoring" in elegant script. Through the window, he could see her, bent over her work, dark hair pinned in a loose bun that caught the morning light. Her fingers moved with the grace of a pianist, needle and thread dancing in perfect harmony. Rosalind Ashford, the woman who'd arrived in Millbrook 2 years ago with nothing but a sewing kit and secrets behind her green eyes. The woman who'd mended his uniform and somehow stitched herself into his heart in the same motion. The bell above the door chimed. As he entered, she looked up, and her face transformed, worry melting into something softer, warmer. "James, I was hoping you'd come." "Rose." Her name fell from his lips like a prayer. "We need to talk." She set down her needlework, a child's dress in cheerful yellow cotton, and smoothed her apron. "It's bad news, isn't it? I can see it in your shoulders. You carry bad news differently than good." He'd never noticed that before. "Leave it to Rose to see what others missed." The evacuation order came this morning. Everyone out by nightfall. The color drained from her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Just nodded once, sharp and decisive. "How long do I have?" 2 hours to pack. The last wagon leaves at sunset. "And you? Will you be on that wagon?" The question hung between them like smoke. James had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, but standing here in her shop, surrounded by half-finished dresses and the lavender scent that clung to everything she touched, the words scattered, like startled birds. "I have my orders," he said finally. "That's not what I asked." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "Will you be on that wagon, James Thorne?" He should say yes. Should tell her about the fallback position, about regrouping with the main force. Should explain duty and honor and all the words that tasted like ash in his mouth when she looked at him like that. Instead, he pulled out the velvet box that Rose's breath caught. Her hand flew to her throat, fingers finding the small silver locket she always wore. "James, you can't. Not now. Not when. I've carried this for 3 months." His voice cracked like a boy's. 3 months of wanting to ask and finding excuses not to. Too much war, too little time, too many reasons it couldn't work. He opened the box, revealing the simple gold band with its modest diamond. All a captain's salary could manage. "But I'm done with excuses, Rose. I'm done with tomorrow." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't speak, didn't move. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. "Marry me," he whispered. "Before the war takes everything else, give me this. Give me you." She touched the ring with trembling fingers. The evacuation will happen whether I'm here or not. Morrison's a good man. He'll see it done. Your orders, damn my orders. The words tore from his throat, raw and desperate. I've spent 5 years following orders, Rose. 5 years watching good men die for bad ground. 5 years of duty. Before everything else. But I won't lose you to duty. I won't let you disappear into the chaos and spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Rose closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they blazed with decision. Yes. 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 I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll risk everything for love instead of running again. She slipped the ring onto her finger, and it caught the light like a star. But James, there's something you need to know about why I came to Millbrook. Something about what I'm running from. The church bells began to toll across town, Morrison's, signal that the evacuation had begun. Through the window, James could see families loading wagons, children clutching dolls and dogs, old men taking one last look at houses they'd never see again. Tell me later, he said, pulling her close. Right now, I need to find Pastor Williams before he gets on that wagon. But as he held her, breathing in lavender and promises, a new sound drifted on the wind, distant but growing closer. The rhythmic thunder of marching feet and the jingle of cavalry harness. The enemy wasn't 18 miles out anymore. The marching grew louder as James burst from the seamstress shop, Rose's hand locked in his. The evacuation wagons moved through Millbrook streets like a funeral procession, too slow, too late, too exposed. Children wailed as mothers clutched them tight. Old men stumbled under the weight of hastily packed belongings. The organized retreat Morrison had planned was dissolving into barely controlled panic. There, James spotted Pastor Williams helping load the church's silver into a wagon. Pastor Williams. Wait. The elderly minister turned, his kind face creased. With worry. Captain Thorne, thank the Lord you're here. Mrs. Henderson's grandson is missing, and the Kowalski family refuses to leave their farm. I need you to perform a marriage. Now, before you leave. Williams blinked, glancing between James and Rose. My son, this is hardly the time. It's exactly the time. Rose stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Will you marry us, Pastor? In the eyes of God, before she gestured toward the approaching thunder of enemy forces. Before whatever comes next. The old man's eyes softened. He'd married 3 generations of Millbrook families, buried their dead, baptized their children. He understood the urgency of love in wartime. Very well, but we must be quick. Do you have witnesses? I'll stand witness. The voice belonged to Mrs. Pemberton, the baker's wife, her flour-dusted apron still tied around her waist. Been watching you two dance around each other for months. About time. She pulled her husband forward. Gerald will witness too. The church, James asked. Pastor Williams shook his head. No time. Here, in the street, under God's open sky. He retrieved his prayer book from the wagon, pages worn soft as silk from decades of use. James Thorne, Rosalind Ashford, joined hands. You could hear everything in that moment. The distant drums of war, the creak of wagon wheels, the whispered prayers of families saying goodbye to their home. But beneath it all, the sound of 2 hearts beating in unison. Dearly beloved, Pastor, Williams began, his voice carrying despite the chaos. We are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. James, do you take Rosalind to be your wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, in times of war and peace, forsaking all others, till death do you part? I do. The words rang clear as church bells. Rosalind, do you take James to be your husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, in times of war and peace, forsaking all others, till death do you part? Rose's voice trembled like a violin string. I do. The ring. James slipped the gold band onto Rose's finger with hands that had loaded cannons and signed death warrants, but never shook until this moment. The simple ceremony felt more sacred than any cathedral service, more binding than any military oath. By the power vested in me by God and the territorial government, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Their kiss lasted 3 heartbeats, long enough to seal the promise, brief enough to hear Lieutenant Morrison's urgent shout from across the square. "Captain, we've got problems." Morrison jogged toward them, his face grave. Behind him, a rider approached on a lathered horse, one of their advance scouts, his uniform torn and bloodied. "Report," James commanded, instantly shifting from bridegroom to military commander. The scout dismounted, swaying on his feet. "Sir, the enemy broke through Hadley's Ridge 2 hours ago. They're moving faster than intelligence predicted. Full cavalry regiment, supported infantry, and," he paused, swallowing hard. "Artillery, sir. They're shelling everything in their path." Morrison's face went pale. "How long until they reach Millbrook?" 3 hours. Maybe less. The evacuation wagons had stopped moving. Every face in the square turned toward James, waiting for orders that could mean the difference between life and death. But all he could think about was Rose's hand in his, still warm from their wedding kiss. "Morrison, get those wagons moving. Double time. Use the northern route through Copper Canyon. It's longer, but safer. Take half the men as escort." James's voice carried the authority of 5 years' command, but his thumb traced circles on Rose's palm. "I'll take the rest and set up a delaying action at Miller's Creek. Buy you time to get clear." "Sir, with respect, that's suicide. Miller's Creek is open ground. No cover, no defensible positions. You'll be slaughtered." "It's not a request, Lieutenant. It's an order." Morrison's jaw tightened. "And Mrs. Thorne? Will she be accompanying the evacuation?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a cannon blast. Every person in the square, from Pastor Williams, clutching his prayer book, to little Tommy Kowalski peeking out from behind his mother's skirts, waited for the answer. Rose squeezed James's hand. "I'm staying." "Rose, no, I'm staying," she repeated louder now. "You think I'd marry you just to run away 30 seconds later? I'm staying, James. We faced this together. You don't understand. This isn't a game. When that cavalry charge hits, I understand perfectly." Her green eyes blazed with sudden fire. "I understand that I've spent 2 years running from who I am, and I'm done running. I understand that you're about to sacrifice yourself for these people, and I'll be damned if I let you do it alone." Mrs. Pemberton stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "If Rose is staying, so am I. This is my town too. And me." Mr. Pemberton nodded grimly. 40 years I've lived here. Not about to let some foreign army chase me out now." One by one, other voices joined them. The blacksmith, still wearing his leather apron. The schoolteacher, Miss Cordelia. Old Henrik the clockmaker, his gnarled hands steady despite his age. A dozen citizens of Millbrook, choosing death over displacement. Morrison looked ready to argue, but James held up a hand. "Those who want to stay, stay. Those with children, elderly, or no stomach for fighting, go with Morrison. No shame in living to fight another day." The crowd sorted itself like grain through a sieve. Families with young ones climbed into wagons with tearful goodbyes. Single men and women of fighting age gathered around James, their faces set with grim determination. Rose moved to his side, and he noticed she'd changed from her wedding dress into practical clothes. Dark trousers, sturdy boots, a man's shirt. That made her look younger, but no less determined. "Where did you get those clothes?" he asked. "I keep them for riding." "James, there's something I need to tell you. About why I came to Millbrook. About what those soldiers are really after." She glanced around at the others, then lowered her voice. "Not here. Too many years. But before we make our stand, you need to know." The last wagon was loading. Pastor Williams climbed aboard, still clutching his prayer book. Mrs. Henderson finally found her grandson hiding in the church bell tower. The Kowalski family emerged from their farm, carrying only what they could hold. Morrison approached one. "Final time. Sir, I'm asking you to reconsider. Come with us. Regroup with the main force. Fight them on better ground." James looked around at Millbrook, the place where he'd learned to love instead of just survive. The cobblestones where he'd walked with Rose on Sunday evenings. The church where they should have been married under better circumstances. The little seamstress shop where she'd stitched together the broken pieces of his heart without even realizing it. "This is our ground, Morrison. These are our people. Sometimes you make your stand not because you can win, but because it's the right thing to do." The lieutenant saluted smartly. "Yes, sir. Good luck, sir." As the wagons rolled out of Millbrook, dust swirling in their wake, James counted his remaining defenders. 18 souls, all told. against a full cavalry regiment. Rose moved closer, her shoulder brushing his. I need to show you something before they get here. Something that explains why they're really coming. She led him toward her shop, but stopped at the door, her hand trembling on the handle. James, what I'm about to show you, it changes things. It makes this fight about more than just defending a town. It makes it about defending a cause that men have died for, that more men will die for. The sound of distant artillery rolled across the hills like thunder. Closer now, much closer. Show me, he said. Rose opened the door to her shop, but instead of going to the main room, she led him to a small storage closet in the back. She moved aside bolts of fabric and sewing supplies, revealing a false panel in the wall. Behind it lay a metal strongbox. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were documents, maps, correspondence, detailed reports, all bearing the seal of the Union Intelligence Service. And at the bottom, wrapped in oiled cloth, a small printing press and stacks of anti-Confederate propaganda. My real name is Rosalind Ashford, she whispered, but my code name is Nightingale. I'm a Union spy, James. I've been feeding intelligence to Washington for 2 years. Those soldiers aren't just invading Millbrook, they're coming for me. The artillery fire was getting closer, and suddenly James understood why the enemy had changed course to attack an insignificant town. The documents scattered across the floor of Rose's hidden compartment like fallen leaves, each one a death sentence if discovered. James knelt among them, his hands moving through intelligence reports that detailed Confederate troop movements, supply lines, and battle plans with surgical precision. 2 years, he whispered, his voice hollow as an empty church. 2 years. You've been feeding information to the Union while He stopped, unable to finish the thought. Rose crouched beside him, her face pale but resolute. While you what, James? While you fell in love with a lie. Are you a lie? The question tore from his throat, raw and desperate. Everything between us, was any of it real? Her hand found his cheek, fingers tracing the scar he'd earned at Antietam. The woman who loves you is real. The woman who just married you is real. The spy. She gestured at the scattered papers. The spy was survival. A role I played to stay alive. James caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. Tell me everything. From the beginning. No more secrets between us, Rose. Not if we're going to die together. Outside, the artillery fire had stopped. The silence felt more ominous than the thunder of cannons. Through the shop window, they could see their makeshift militia taking positions behind overturned wagons and market stalls. 18 souls against hundreds. The mathematics of martyrdom. Rose pulled a photograph from the strongbox. A young woman in an elaborate dress standing beside a Confederate officer with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. My real name is Rosalind Beaumont. I was engaged to Colonel Victor Garrison of the Georgia 15th. Have you heard of him? James's blood turned to ice water. Everyone in the Union Army had heard of Garrison, a man who treated war crimes like mourning exercises. His regiment left a trail of burned towns and executed civilians from Virginia to Tennessee. You were engaged to Butcher Garrison. My father arranged it. Said it would be advantageous for our family's holdings. Rose's voice carried the bitter taste of old wounds. I was 19, naive, thought I could change him. Then I saw what he did to a slave who spilled wine on his uniform. Her hands clenched into fists. I watched him beat a 15-year-old boy nearly to death over a stain. So you ran. I ran that night. Stole his horse, his sidearm, and a strongbox of Confederate gold. Made it to Union lines half dead from exposure. She touched the silver locket at her throat. Captain Murphy of the 3rd Massachusetts Intelligence Corps gave me a choice: hang as a deserter and thief, or use my knowledge of Confederate society to serve the Union cause. James understood now. The way she sometimes flinched at loud noises. The careful way she moved through crowds. The practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes when strangers asked about her past. So they sent you here to gather intelligence. Millbrook sits at the crossroads of 3 major Confederate supply routes. Perfect position to observe troop movements, supply convoys, strategic communications. Rose's voice grew stronger, more confident. I've been feeding Washington detailed reports. For 2 years, my intelligence helped the Union win at Cedar Mountain and prevented a massacre at Chancellorsville. The sound of hoofbeats echoed through the empty streets. James moved to the window, pulling Rose behind the shelter of the wall. Through the Lace curtains. He could see them. Confederate cavalry riding into Millbrook's town square like conquering heroes. Gray uniforms, polished sabers. Horses that pranced with barely contained energy. Their head rode a figure that made James's stomach clench with recognition. Colonel Victor Garrison sat his mount like a king surveying his domain. Even from a distance, there was something reptilian about his stillness, the way his head turned slowly to examine each building. "He found me," Rose whispered, her face white as parchment. "After 2 years, he finally found me." "How?" "I don't know. Maybe someone recognized me. Maybe they intercepted one of my reports." She gripped James's arm. "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that he's here for me, and he'll burn this entire town to get me back." Through the window, they watched Garrison raise his hand. His cavalry spread out in formation, surrounding the town square where James's tiny militia crouched behind their makeshift barricades. The Confederate colonel's voice carried across the silence like a church bell tolling death. "Citizens of Millbrook, you harbor a criminal and a spy. Surrender, Rosalind Beaumont, and you will be allowed to leave unharmed. Refuse, and this town burns. You have 5 minutes to decide." James felt Rose tense beside him. She was preparing to run, to give herself up to save the others. He'd seen that look before, on soldiers about to make the ultimate sacrifice. "No," he said quietly. "James, you don't understand. He'll kill everyone here just to prove a point. I've seen what he does to towns that defy him. I won't let innocent people die for what? For love? For loyalty? For the right to choose their own fate." James turned from the window, his hands framing her face. "Rose, those people out there didn't stay because they had to. They stayed because they chose to. Because sometimes there are things worth dying for. But if you surrender, you'll be tortured for information, then hanged as a spy. If we run, he'll hunt us down like animals. If we fight, we all die. 18 against 200. Those aren't odds, James. That's suicide." James smiled, and for the first time since reading the evacuation order, it reached his eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe we're about to show Colonel Garrison that some people can't be broken by fear." He moved to Rose's sewing kit, pulling out her sharpest scissors. With quick, efficient movements, he began cutting strips from a bolt of white cotton. "What are you doing?" "Making a flag of truce. We're going out there." "James, no. If he sees me, he's going to see you anyway. But he's going to see you as my wife, not his runaway property. There's a difference." Rose's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "You magnificent fool. You know this won't work." "Maybe not. But I'd rather die standing beside my wife than live knowing I let her face the devil alone." They stepped out into Millbrook's main street together, James carrying the white flag, Rose walking beside him with her chin raised and her hand steady in his. Behind their makeshift barricades, their defenders watched with expressions ranging from admiration to terror. Garrison's cavalry parted like the Red Sea as they approached. Up close, the Confederate colonel was even more intimidating. Tall, lean, with pale eyes that seemed to look right through you. His horse snorted and pawed the ground, sensing its rider's barely leashed violence. Well, Garrison drawled, his cultured Virginia accent making every word sound like a threat. "Little Rosalind, all grown up and playing dress-up as a commoner." His gaze shifted to James. "And you must be the fool who married my property." "She's not your property," James said quietly. "She's my wife, legally wed before God and witnesses. Any claim you had on her died the moment she said, 'I do.'" Garrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Legal? According to whose law?" "You. Union dogs seem to forget. You're in Confederate territory now. Your laws mean nothing here." "Then let's discuss Confederate law," Rose said, stepping forward. Her voice carried a steel edge James had never heard before. "Under Confederate Civil Code, a woman cannot be compelled to marry against her will. I dissolved our engagement the night I left, Victor. You received my letter. A letter written under duress hardly constitutes legal dissolution. What about this?" Rose pulled a folded document from her bodice, their marriage certificate, signed by Pastor Williams not 2 hours ago. "I am legally wed to Captain Thorne. Even under Confederate law, that supersedes any previous engagement." Garrison's pale eyes narrowed to slits. "You think a piece of paper will protect you?" You think this pathetic collection of farmers and shopkeepers can stand against a trained cavalry regiment? He leaned forward in his saddle. I'll give you one more chance, Rosalind. Come with me now, and I'll allow your new husband to live. Refuse, and I'll make him watch while my men take turns with you before I put a bullet in his head. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Around them, Confederate soldiers shifted in their saddles, hands moving to sabers and pistols. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then James did something unexpected. He laughed. You know what's funny, Colonel? You ride into our town with 200 men, make threats against civilians, and act like you're some kind of hero. But you're not fighting soldiers. You're not defending your homeland. You're hunting down one woman because your pride can't handle being rejected. Garrison's face flushed red. How dare you? I dare because I've seen real soldiers, Colonel. Men who fight for something bigger than themselves. Men who protect the innocent instead of terrorizing them. James's voice carried across the square, reaching every ear. You want my wife? Come and take her. But know this, every man, woman, and child in this town stands between you and her. We may die today, but we'll die free. Behind their barricades, the defenders of Millbrook rose to their feet. 18 souls against hundreds, but their faces showed no fear. Only determination. Garrison's hand moved to his saber. So be it. When I'm done with this town, there won't be enough left to bury. He raised his voice to carry to his men. No quarter, no prisoners. Burn it all. But as his cavalry prepared to charge, a new sound echoed across the hills. Deep, rhythmic, growing stronger by the second, the thunder of Union drums and the brass call of military bugles. Morrison hadn't retreated after all. The Union drums thundered across Millbrook's hills like the heartbeat of an angry god. Morrison hadn't retreated. He'd circled back with reinforcements, timing his approach to catch Garrison's cavalry in a pincer movement. Through the dust cloud rising from the eastern ridge, James could see the blue uniforms of the 12th Pennsylvania Infantry cresting the hill, their bayonets glinting like stars in the afternoon sun. Garrison's head snapped toward the sound, his pale eyes calculating distances and odds with the precision of a seasoned commander. His cavalry, spread out to intimidate civilians, was suddenly exposed and vulnerable. The predator had become prey in the span of a heartbeat. Form up, Garrison bellowed to his men. Defensive square. Prepare for infantry assault. But it was too late for textbook maneuvers. Morrison had timed his advance perfectly, catching the Confederate cavalry in the worst possible position, dismounted in a town square with limited mobility, facing coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The first Union volley erupted like thunder, rifle fire cracking across the square in disciplined waves. Lead balls whistled through the air, striking cobblestones and wooden buildings with sharp percussion beats. Garrison's horse reared, screaming as a bullet grazed its flank. The colonel fought to control his mount while barking orders that were lost in the chaos of battle. James grabbed Rose's hand, pulling her toward the nearest cover, the stone foundation of the clockmaker's shop. Stay down, he shouted over the gunfire. Morrison's boys know their business. But Rose wasn't cowering. Her green eyes blazed with fierce determination as she watched the battle unfold. The Confederate supply wagon, she said, pointing toward Garrison's rear guard. Third wagon from the left. It's carrying ammunition and medical supplies. If we can reach it, we— James stared at her in disbelief. Rose, you're not a soldier. This isn't your fight. Her laugh was sharp as broken glass. Not my fight. James, I've been fighting this war longer than most of your men have been in uniform. I know where Garrison keeps his reserves, how his men think, what they'll do when pressed. She pulled a small derringer from her boot. When had she armed herself? I'm not hiding while good men die for my freedom. Before James could protest, she was moving, darting between overturned market stalls with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned to navigate battlefields. He cursed under his breath and followed, his service revolver drawn and ready. The battle raged around them like a living thing. Morrison's infantry advanced in textbook formation, their rifles speaking, in coordinated volleys that drove Garrison's cavalry back toward the town center. But the Confederates weren't breaking. They were seasoned veterans who knew how to fight outnumbered. They'd formed a defensive circle around their supply wagons, using the vehicles as improvised fortifications. There, Rose pointed toward a gap in the Confederate line where 2 soldiers had fallen. If we can reach that wagon, I can disable their ammunition supplies. Black powder and water don't mix well. James saw the opportunity and the terrible risk. 50 yards of open ground, swept by rifle fire from both sides. Men had died for less distance. It's suicide, Rose. Even if we make it, we'll be trapped behind enemy lines. Then we'd better not get trapped. She smiled, and for a moment he saw not the frightened refugee or the careful spy, but the fierce woman who'd chosen love over safety. Ready? They moved together, using the smoke and confusion as cover. James had fought in a dozen battles, but he'd never experienced anything like this, running toward death with the woman he loved, trusting her judgment with his life. Rose led them through the chaos with uncanny precision, as if she could read the battle SRHYTHM like sheet music. A Confederate trooper spotted them, swinging his carbine toward Rose. James's revolver barked twice, the heavy .44 slugs spinning the man around like a child's top. But the shots drew attention. Suddenly they were running through a gauntlet of rifle fire, lead balls whining past their ears like angry wasps. Rose stumbled, crying out. Blood bloomed across her left shoulder, staining her white blouse crimson. James caught her before she could fall, his heart stopping as he saw the wound. I'm fine, she gasped, though her face was pale as parchment. Just a graze. Keep moving. They reached the supply wagon as another Union volley swept the square. Rose's hands worked with desperate efficiency, tearing open powder kegs and mixing their contents with water from a barrel. The black powder dissolved into useless sludge, rendering an entire wagon load of ammunition worthless. One down, she said, already moving toward the next wagon. 2 more to go. But Garrison had spotted them. The colonel fought his way through the melee, his saber cutting silver arcs through the smoke-filled air. Blood streaked his face from a grazing wound, and his pale eyes burned with murderous fury. Rosalind. His voice cut through the battle noise like a blade. You always were too clever for your own good. He spurred his horse toward them, saber raised for a killing stroke. James stepped between them, his revolver tracking the colonel's approach. The 2 men locked eyes across 20 yards of contested ground. Union captain and Confederate colonel, fighting for the same woman's fate. James fired. The bullet took Garrison's horse in the chest, and the animal collapsed in a tangle of thrashing limbs. The colonel rolled clear with the practiced ease of an experienced cavalryman, coming up with his saber still in hand and murder in his eyes. You want to play the hero, Captain? Garrison's cultured voice carried clearly despite the battle raging around them. Let's see how heroic you feel with my steel in your belly. The 2 men circled each other while the battle swirled around them like a deadly dance. Garrison was taller, with longer reach and a cavalry saber designed for mounted combat. But James had fought knife fighters in Mexican cantinas and learned sword work from a French fencing master in New Orleans. Different weapons, same principles, distance, timing, and the will to kill. Garrison attacked first, his saber whistling in a diagonal cut, meant to split James from shoulder to hip. James parried with his heavy revolver, the steel barrel ringing like a bell as it turned the blade aside. He riposted with the guns, aiming for Garrison's temple. But the colonel danced back with fluid grace. You fight well for a Yankee. Dog, Garrison taunted, his saber weaving hypnotic patterns in the air. But you're fighting for another man's woman. She belonged to me first, Captain. When you're dead, she'll belong to me again. She belongs to herself, James replied, circling to keep the sun at his back. That's what you never understood, Colonel. Rose isn't property to be owned. Rose wasn't idle during their deadly conversation. James caught glimpses of her moving between the supply wagons, her wounded arm pressed against her side, but her good hand still working to sabotage Confederate supplies. Medical kits scattered into the mud, food barrels punctured and drained. She was systematically destroying everything Garrison's force needed to sustain itself. Garrison feinted left, then lunged right with a thrust aimed at James's heart. The captain twisted aside, feeling the blade part the fabric of his uniform. Coat. He grabbed Garrison's sword arm with his free hand, pulling the colonel close enough to smell the pomade in his hair. They grappled like wild animals, rolling in the mud of Millbrook Street while bullets whined overhead. Garrison was strong, but James had spent 5 years fighting a war that aged men decades. He drove his knee into the colonel's ribs, feeling bone crack under the impact. Garrison gasped, his grip on the saber loosening. James tore the weapon away and reversed it, pressing the point to the colonel's throat. Around them, the battle was turning. Morrison's infantry had broken the Confederate line, and gray-clad soldiers were surrendering or retreating toward the hills. "Yield," James said quietly. Garrison's pale eyes blazed with hatred. "Never. She was mine first, Yankee. Mine by right of, she was never yours." Rose's voice cut through his protests like a blade. She stood over them both, her derringer pointed at Garrison's head with steady hands despite her wound. "I was engaged to you, Victor. I was never yours. There's a difference." The colonel's face twisted with rage and something else, the dawning realization that his obsession had cost him everything. His cavalry was scattered or captured. His supplies were destroyed. The woman he'd hunted for 2 years stood above him, married to another man, pointing a gun at his heart. "You destroyed me," he whispered. "My career, my reputation, my future, all gone because of you." "No," Rose said softly. "You destroyed yourself the moment you chose cruelty over kindness. The moment you decided other people existed for your pleasure." She glanced at James, then back at Garrison. "I'm not going to kill you, Victor. That would make me like you. But if you ever come near my husband or my home again, I will put a bullet between your eyes without hesitation." Morrison appeared at James's shoulder, breathing hard from the battle. "Sir, what are your orders regarding the prisoners?" James looked down at Garrison, still pinned beneath his saber. The colonel's eyes held no surrender, no acknowledgement of defeat, only the promise of future vengeance. Some men couldn't be redeemed, only contained. Colonel Garrison is to be held for exchange. Full honors as befits his rank, but maximum security. He's dangerous. James stood, offering his hand to help Rose steady herself. "How many casualties, Lieutenant?" "Light. On our side, sir. The 12th Pennsylvania took most of the losses during the initial assault. We lost 3 killed, 7 wounded. The Confederates." Morrison glanced around at the battlefield. 32 captured, including officers. The rest scattered to the hills. As the smoke cleared, Millbrook revealed itself again, scarred but standing. Bullet holes pocked the walls of shops and houses. The cobblestones were stained with blood and littered with debris. But the heart of the town remained intact. Mrs. Pemberton emerged from her bakery, flour still dusting her apron, carrying a basket of fresh bread for the wounded. Mr. Henrik began gathering the scattered pieces of his clockwork, muttering about the unreliability of military schedules. Miss Cordelia organized the children who'd hidden during the battle, checking each one for injuries with a mother's care. Life reasserting itself in the face of death. Hope growing in ground watered with sacrifice. James wrapped his arm around Rose's waist, supporting her weight as her adrenaline faded and exhaustion took hold. Her shoulder needed medical attention, but she was alive. They were both alive. Against all odds, against military logic, against the mathematics of war, they had survived. "So what happens now?" Rose asked, leaning into his strength. "The war's not over. There will be other battles, other enemies." James looked around at their battered town, their bloodied defenders, their uncertain future. Then he looked at his wife, spy, seamstress, warrior, the woman who'd chosen to stand and fight rather than run and hide. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. And we do it together." 3 months later, Millbrook bloomed again. The bullet holes in the clockmaker's shop had been patched with fresh timber that would weather to match in time. Mrs. Pemberton's bakery displayed new glass windows that caught morning light like captured diamonds. The cobblestones, scrubbed clean of battle stains, rang again with the laughter of children playing games that didn't involve soldiers or cannons. James stood in the doorway of what had once been Rose's seamstress shop, watching his wife arrange bolts of fabric with the same gentle precision she'd once used to sabotage ammunition wagons. Her left shoulder still carried a scar from Garrison's bullet, but her hands moved without hesitation as she measured silk for Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter's confirmation dress. "You're staring again," Rose said without looking up, though he could hear the smile in her voice. "Can't help it. Still can't quite believe you're real." She glanced over her shoulder, green eyes sparkling with mischief. "After everything we've been through, you're worried I'm a dream." "Not a dream. A miracle." The bell above the door chimed as Morrison entered, his lieutenant's uniform pressed and spotless despite 3 months of garrison duty. The young officer had grown into his responsibilities since the battle, showing the kind of steady leadership that would serve him well when the war finally ended. "Morning, Captain." "Mrs. Thorne." Morrison touched his cap politely. "The morning reports, sir." James accepted the leather portfolio, though he barely glanced at the pages inside. Patrol schedules, supply requests, correspondence from headquarters, the mundane details of peacetime garrison life. After 5 years of war, the ordinary felt extraordinary. "Any word from Washington about our prisoner?" Rose asked, her voice carefully neutral. Morrison's expression darkened. "Colonel Garrison escaped during transport to Fort Delaware. Overpowered his guards during a river crossing. They found the escort wagon 2 days later. 3 good men dead." The news settled over the shop like winter fog. They'd all known this day would come. Men like Garrison didn't surrender quietly or accept defeat with grace. He was somewhere out there, nursing his hatred and planning revenge. "He'll come back," Rose said quietly, her hands stilling on the fabric. "Men like Victor don't forgive or forget. Let him come." James's voice carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd found something worth defending. "We beat him once. We can beat him again." Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "Actually, sir, there's something else. Orders came through this morning." He pulled a second document from his coat, official stationery bearing the War Department seal. "You're being reassigned to Washington. Intelligence liaison position. Effective immediately." James read the orders twice, his expression carefully blank. "A promotion, really. Important work coordinating spy networks and resistance cells throughout the occupied territories. The kind of position that could shape the war's outcome." "What about Millbrook?" he asked. "Garrison command transfers to Captain Bradley of the 15th Massachusetts. Good man, solid record." Morrison paused. "Sir, this is a significant opportunity. Working directly with the Intelligence Corps, helping coordinate operations like the ones Mrs. Thorne ran. No." James folded the orders and handed them back. "Send my regrets to Washington. I'm staying." Morrison blinked in surprise. "Sir, you can't refuse a direct assignment. It would be career suicide." "Then I suppose my military career ends here." James moved to stand beside Rose, his hand finding hers. "Lieutenant Morrison, effective immediately, I'm resigning my commission. In the United States Army." The words hung in the air like smoke from a cannon blast. Rose turned to stare at him, her green eyes wide with shock. "James, you can't. The war isn't over. Your duty, my duty, is to my wife and my community." He squeezed her hand gently. "I've spent 5 years following orders, Rose. 5 years. Watching other men make decisions about how I'd live and where I'd serve and what I'd sacrifice. I'm done letting other people choose my path." Morrison looked between them, clearly struggling with the implications. "Sir, with respect, you're needed in Washington. Your experience, your connections, will serve just as well from Millbrook. You think the war's only fought on battlefields, Morrison? It's fought in places like this, by people like us, choosing every day to build something better than what we're tearing down." James gestured toward the window, where townspeople moved about their daily business with quiet determination. "This town defended itself once. It can do it again. And if Garrison comes back with a full regiment, then we'll face that when it happens. Together." Rose's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You'd give up everything for me? Your career, your rank, your future." "I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing what matters most." James turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face the way he had on their wedding day. "Rose, I've been a soldier for 5 years. I've been your husband for 3 months. I know which one makes me a better man." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Morrison was studying the floor with the careful attention of a man trying not to intrude on private moments. "What will you do?" the lieutenant asked finally. "If you're not a soldier anymore?" James looked around the shop, at the bolts of fabric waiting to become wedding dresses and Sunday coats, at the sewing machine that hummed with productive purpose, at the small but steady business his wife had built from nothing but skill and determination. "I'll be a shopkeeper, a husband, maybe a father someday, if we're blessed." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it carried no weight of command or burden of responsibility. I'll be ordinary Morrison. And that sounds like the finest thing in the world. The bell chimed again as Pastor Williams entered, his prayer book tucked under one arm and a basket of early spring flowers in his hand. Good morning, all. James, Rose, I was hoping you might have a moment. Of course, Pastor. What can we do for you? The elderly minister smiled, his kind eyes twinkling with suppressed excitement. Well, it seems our little battle has attracted some attention. The church council in Richmond wants to interview you both about what happened here. Something about courage under fire and the power of faith in dark times. Rose exchanged glances with James. Interview us. For a book they're writing. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things during the war. They think Millbrook's defense would inspire others. Pastor Williams set down his flower basket, revealing spring tulips and early roses, the first blooms after winter's long siege. Of course, I told them you'd probably prefer your privacy. Actually, James said slowly, maybe it's time our story was told. Not the military version or the official report, but the real story. About choosing love over fear. About standing together when the world tries to tear you apart. Rose nodded, her hand still clasped in his. About finding home in the most unlikely places. As afternoon melted into evening, Millbrook settled into its peaceful rhythms. Children played in streets that had seen battle just months before. Shopkeepers swept their stoops and gossiped about weather and weddings. Mrs. Pemberton's bread filled the air with the scent of yeast and comfort. James and Rose walked the cobblestone streets arm in arm, their steps matching like partners in a dance they'd learned by heart. They paused at the town square where they'd faced Garrison's cavalry, where 18 souls had chosen to stand against impossible odds. Any regrets? Rose asked, her voice soft in the twilight. About which part? Marrying a spy? Defying orders? Starting a new life in a bullet-scarred town? Any of it? All of it? James considered the question seriously. He thought about his abandoned military career, the comfortable future he'd given up, the uncertainty that lay ahead. Then he looked at his wife, the woman who'd shown him that. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to love despite it. No regrets, he said finally. Every choice led me here, to this moment, to you. I wouldn't change a single step. They stopped before the small garden Rose had planted behind their shop. The spring flowers were just beginning to bloom, roses, and lavender, daffodils, and sweet peas. Life returning to ground that had been barren just months before. Do you think he'll come back? Rose asked, though her voice carried more curiosity than fear. Garrison? Probably. Men like him don't let go easily. And if he does? James pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of lavender and new beginnings. Then we'll face him together, the way we face everything else. Above them, the first stars appeared in a sky that promised clear weather ahead. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, not a call to arms or warning of danger, but simply marking time's passage in a place where people had chosen to build rather than destroyed. In her garden, Rose's flowers bloomed in defiance of winter's memory, proving that life always finds a way to push through the darkness toward light. And so ended the tale of Captain James Thorne and the spy who became his salvation. A story of love choosing duty over orders, of ordinary people becoming extraordinary. When they decide to stand together against the storm, that if this story stirred your heart like morning coffee warms your soul, show us with a like and share your thoughts below. For more tales of love conquering all manner of impossibilities, ring that subscription bell. We've got stories yet to tell that'll make you believe in miracles again. Tell us in the comments, where in this wide world are you watching from today? We love hearing from our families scattered across the globe.